Well, yesterday morning we saw some news come out of Canberra that has got me rather annoyed, more so even than usual when news comes out of Canberra. It's often annoying. This is frankly irritating. The news is that the government, the federal government, plans to go ahead with more water buybacks. These are the same water buybacks that have previously been done under the Murray-Darling Basin Plan and have been absolutely devastating for irrigation communities. The irrigation communities, for their part, have been begging the government to find different ways of achieving the objectives that they've set out to accomplish. But the government, and the Greens in particular, have done a deal with the government. They would have none of it, and they're going ahead with buybacks. To get some of the community reaction and to talk about what this means, I'm being joined by Lloyd Polkinghorne from the Bridge News. Lloyd, I wish we could meet under better circumstances, but nevertheless, thank you for coming on the Aussie Wire.
G'day, Topher. Thanks for having me.
Mate, this has got to come as a bit of a body blow. Was it unexpected, or was there already a sense that this was the likely outcome?
Unfortunately, it was a bit of a sense that this was going to be the outcome. We've seen Minister Plibersek totally ignore our area, not visit the region, not see the impacts that have happened. 83% of the previous water recovered has come from the Southern Connected System. And she's been giving us a wide berth, so that was a real concern.
Well, I began touching on this about 10 years ago, and I was only able to do that because of the incredible research of people like yourself and others that you've been working with, trying to raise the alarm. One of the things that concerns me is I don't think a lot of city people really understand just how serious something like irrigation water could be for them. They'd see a headline like this and think, oh, it's to do with the Murray-Darling Basin, the environment, it's all good, nothing to see here. What's the reality of this? Help anyone who's not come across this topic before to understand what are the implications for Australia?
Well, the implications are huge. Moving water from the productive sector not only impacts the price of food and food availability, but also on-farm environments across our part of the basin. Quite a lot of the areas that have been targeted in water buybacks are historical irrigation areas. That's where water flowed already, and then it was regulated and metered and on part of the floodplain. So we had bird life and frogs and goannas and all manner of creatures that exist on these farms. And then we also applied water in a timely manner to produce food and fibre, to feed and clothe people. Really well-run systems. So they were historically gravity-fed systems. So in a time where we're worried about cost of energy and carbon, these were gravity-fed essentially from the source to the farm.
Yeah. It's quite an astonishing thing, and it's one of those areas that took me a very long time to begin to get my head around, and we can only really touch on it very lightly here. I want to touch on two things that really got me fired up, and I apologise. I'm gonna rant a little bit here, but this stuff really, frankly, pisses me off. This is an extract from the ABC's coverage of this from yesterday morning. It says, according to Senator Hanson-Young, a South Australian senator, the Murray-Darling Basin Plan has not delivered what it promised to deliver. Now, of course, the draft plan was released in 2012 based on based on the Water Act of 2007. And I've got to say that Senator Hanson-Young completely misunderstands the plan here, because the Murray-Darling Basin Plan could not deliver what was promised. The means of action, the mechanisms, these water buybacks, removing water from productive use, could not accomplish the triple bottom line that was promised. Now, let's cast our mind back. We were promised it was going to be good for farmers. We were promised it was going to be good for the communities in which the farmers lived and worked, and we were promised that it was going to be good for the environment. Now, I happen to agree with Senator Hanson-Young here that it has not delivered on those promises. What's the reality, Lloyd? What's the reality of those three triple bottom line outcomes that it was supposed to deliver on? What's actually happened?
The Basin Plan's been a wrecking ball for our communities. We've got countless social and economic studies that have demonstrated the loss of jobs and industries, and also the broader impacts to mental health and schools and footy clubs to communities that rely on irrigation. Now, at the heart of the plan, the Basin Plan is identifying small sections of publicly owned environment to save while discounting huge portions of the basin. We are a giant basin, and we all agree that it has to be healthy, but we have to look at it in an integrated way. You can't just focus on recovering huge volumes of water without a plan of how to deliver it, where it's going, how you get it there. Like we've already seen the Murray here at Barham, we've lost 15 metres since 2012 of riverbank. So if we're actually talking about a plan to save the river, well, you go, well, hang on, something's a bit out of skew. We're actually destroying part of the environment we're supposedly trying to save. Senator Hanson-Young actually talked about in the press release today that these changes are a huge win for South Australia. And she's talking about the Coorong and the lower lakes and maintaining the Murray Mouth being open. Now, the MDBA already have 4,622 gigs of held environmental water. And so if we're not achieving those objectives already, with the huge floods we've had, with the increased river flows and all that environmental water, well, adding more water is not going to help. If you're fighting the Southern Ocean and trying to maintain a freshwater estuary and ignoring the science and history behind the lower lakes and what's going on down there, you know, there's the bigger things we have to look at than just buying water.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. There's a second half to this comment here that really speaks to what you've just commented on, the fact that they weren't measuring the environmental harms that came about because they were taking water away from on-farm environments. It says that since the $13 billion Murray-Darling Basin Plan was legislated in 2012, more than 2,100 gigalitres of water, and for city people that's a pretty much unimaginable volume of water, more than 2,100 gigalitres of water each year has been allocated to the environment. And that, of course, is Orwellian newspeak. It's an abuse of language. It was moved from one environment, that being the on-farm environment, into a different environment. And you could make the case that that's a good thing if you want to, but it's a very different thing and completely overlooks the incredible biodiversity that occurs in irrigation channels and in on-farm environments. What are you observing? A lot of channel systems have been shut down. A lot of farmers have moved on. A lot of farms have either been rationalised into big corporate farms, or in fact, a lot of land is actually just going back to being fallow. What are some of the environmental outcomes that you're observing in your community as a result of water being taken away?
Well, when you dry out the environment, that has a huge impact. Northern Victoria just closed down almost 2,000 kilometres of earthen channels now. They're some of the best breeding, feeding and habitat wildlife corridors across that region. You know, it's a refuge for things to go and get a drink, and also, you know, for ducks. New South Wales' latest duck survey, the highest number of black ducks were actually found on open air channels. Yeah. So, you know, when you're trying to talk about the environment, there's this, it's a tapestry. You're looking at on-farm storages, you're looking at channels, you're looking at creeks and rivers, and things migrate between them. As water left irrigation districts, you know, the huge ibis flocks that we get from the Coorong rookery, you know, you'd see them start to disappear because they'd once come and actually feed on irrigated pastures like dairy farms and sheep farms, chase all the spiders and bugs as farmers were irrigating, and you remove that water and that has a knock-on effect. Everything is interlinked.
Well, the federal government is actually claiming that irrigators are behind this move. And a little while ago, as they were sort of putting their ducks in a row, if I can use a duck analogy while we're talking about wildlife, they put the feelers out and they claimed that more than double the required number of the required volume of water is being offered to them from farmers. Now, I know enough about this to know that that farmers that get out early, the farmers that sell out, are the ones that are least harmed. It's the ones that stay behind that actually get devastated. And I've got a bit of the work that I did in 2019, a bit of a video, if you'll bear with me, Lloyd. It's about 3 minutes long. It'll be familiar to you. You've seen it. You're familiar with this one. But I know a lot of our viewers won't have seen the full 10-minute version that it originally was. And I think while we're thinking about these farmers that are agreeing to sell their water, we need to think about the farmers that are left behind. And it's going to look a lot like this video from 2019.
I know city people now want to know where their food comes from, but I don't think they really do want to know where their food comes from. They want a pretty picture, but I don't think they really want the true picture of the cost of. There's 1 or 2 farmers every month committing suicide.
Yeah, well, this is a really good farm, and it's known to be one of the best farms in the district. The challenge is we can't afford the water at the current pricing to put on the place to make it pay. You know, like.
Water security is what the backbone of the farm's based on, and when that's swept out from under our feet, it's very hard to have a business model that is successful.
We have lost 40 farms around here have sold their cows.
Nearly every shop in the Coorong and in Coon is for sale. So,
our local real estate agent, he goes, "What do I do with these farmers?" He said, "This week I've had 3 farmers." He's saying to these people that are 50, 60 years old, your farm's worth $600,000, and they turn around and go, well, we owe the bank $700,000. Like, they've actually ended up with nothing. They've busted their guts for 30 years for nothing.
The first lot of temporary water I bought for this farm was $4 a meg. This year, water got up to, you know, over $600 a meg. So the milk price is okay, but it doesn't cover those input costs.
You know, currently our cost of production is much higher than the income we're receiving for our milk. For how long we can do that, you know, it's something you can't do for very long.
Oh well, it just depends when someone wants to close the door on an account that we owe money on, you know, like that's the reality. It can be tomorrow, I guess.
It's sort of, you know, we got 2 young kids, and it sort of puts a strain on your marriage, and you know, you're wondering what you're doing it for, and then you want to keep in it because you have to, really. Like, you've really got not many other choices, and we do like doing what we're doing, but you know, like after the last 12 months, there's a question there. It's, do we love it enough to keep going backwards with wondering about your future every day, wondering about where your kids are going to be, all that stuff?
Imagine me passing on this debt to my children. How are they going to farm with this sort of debt, with this pressure, with this unknowing whether they're going to get water or not, year upon year? How one would wish that upon their children. You wouldn't wish your children. You wouldn't wish to farm in this environment for your children.
That's the reality of what happens when water prices go through the roof. Farmers go out of business, people lose everything. The banks foreclose, and of course we lose the wisdom of multi-generational farming families. The younger generation, very understandably, either doesn't want to or simply can't carry on that family legacy. So it's no wonder that when the government comes along and says we're going to spend lots of money on water, there's a lot of farmers very quick to take them up on that offer, because if they don't, that's the situation they find themselves in. What's the mood amongst the farmers that you've spoken to in the community that you live in? Is there a sense of despair? Is there a sense of hope? Is there a desire to fight back? What's the reaction?
I think they're absolutely gutted. I mean, we had social and economic protections written into the plan because we'd seen the devastating impacts that water buybacks have. We're just seeing the government throw those to the wind. I mean, the best farmers, in my opinion, are the multi-generational farmers, because they're looking at a bigger picture.
Yeah.
They're farming for generations ahead. So they're considering environmental impacts as well as being sustainable and being there in the long run. One of the problems is that I see is when you see this contraction of family farmers and small corporate orientated farming get in, they are there for sheer profits. They actually don't care about the land as much. And, you know, I've witnessed that with some of the permanent plantings and problems around salinity and groundwater. They're things that you would never get away with as a generational farmer. You couldn't take that approach if you were looking to farm for 2, 3, 4 generations into the future. The other thing we're seeing is that the cost of water, like water has exploded. When I first went home to the farm, it was like $300-400 a meg for permanent water, and that same water is now $1,800 a meg. You know, the price, the return of the commodities hasn't tracked that growth, and so you're being backed into a corner. And so for a young person that essentially got to inherit or come from some amazing job elsewhere to have the capital to enter the market. And the other thing that story doesn't talk about is when they're flocked with people wanting to sell water, well, you know, farmers are only one percentage of, like a small percentage or a percentage of the water market now, because we know that institutional investors make up quite a significant number of water holdings. So when you see an article where, you know, irrigators are flocking to sell water, well, that could be, you know, foreign pension funds, or that could be someone sitting in Melbourne. It may not necessarily be irrigators, but it'll be someone who's looking to capitalise on their returns.
only too happy to cash in on the misfortune of our farming communities. And this is only going to make the cost of living crisis worse. If you think the groceries are expensive now, just give it another 2 years while these water buybacks unfold. Lloyd, I hope one day to be able to chat with you under happier circumstances. I'm certainly going to continue this fight. I've been involved in it now for 10 years. I know that that's not a lot of time compared to some people who've been in it for 70 years, their entire lives. But we need to keep fighting this. It's too important of an issue to let it go. I'm going to put some links into the description of this video. But before we wind up the interview, Lloyd, how can people find you and where can people find organisations that are helping to push back on this issue?
Yeah, look, I really encourage people to get involved and actually follow some of the groups who are advocating for family farmers and their environment. Speak Up for Water is a great one. You'll be able to find their Facebook page. You can find, I did a 300-kilometre walk to try and raise awareness of what was happening to family farmers. That's Lloyd's Walk for Water. Yeah, so if you follow along, try and get involved. There's a diverse range of issues across the basin. It's such a big basin, and that's why it's important. I think these communities have a chance to have their say and fight for balance. That's all we want. We want a healthy, balanced plan that's good for the people who live here and the environment we love. And yeah, we appreciate your work too, Toby.
My pleasure, Lloyd, and I look forward to speaking to you again in future, hopefully under happier circumstances. Thank you so much for coming on the Aussie Wire.
Thanks, Toby.